Undercover CEO buys a steak at his own steakhouse, stops cold when two cashiers speak the truth. The city lights reflected faintly across the dusty car windows. Michael Carter tightened his grip on the brim of his dark baseball cap, the black rim glasses slipping slightly down his nose. In the hazy reflection of the window, one could only make out an ordinary middle-aged man wearing a pale blue shirt and plain jeans, no trace left of the man who had built the legendary Carter's Steakhouse empire across 3 states. His luxurious Bentley sat idle in the garage. Tonight, he chose to borrow his assistant's old sedan, as if deliberately cutting all ties with the powerful CEO image he'd worn for so long. 15 years ago, in a smoky kitchen rich with the scent of burning oak, Michael had sworn he'd never let success erode his founding values, where every steak was seasoned with pure passion and every employee's smile was warmer than any lavish chandelier. But like so many others, he'd been swept away by numbers, financial reports, and endless boardroom meetings, drifting further from the kitchen and the heartbeat of the brand he'd built. And then, the cold, unforgiving words started appearing on online reviews. It's not the same anymore. Terrible service. Staff couldn't care less. The food isn't worth the price. Each word was a small blade, cutting deep into the pride of a man who once stood over glowing coals, flipping steaks with his bare hands for waiting guests. Michael exhaled long and slow, his warm breath fogging up the cold glass. If you want the truth, you have to see it with your own eyes. The harsh sound of the car lock echoed. Michael stepped out, walking steadily toward the flagship restaurant, the very crown jewel of the Carter's Steakhouse empire. As the revolving glass door clicked gently shut behind him, he was instantly enveloped by the familiar aroma of perfectly grilled steaks, rich buttery char, and the lingering smokiness of oak wood. The interior was warm, polished mahogany, gleaming softly under golden lights. The delicate clink of cutlery and the faint murmur of conversation blended into a quiet, elegant symphony. But tonight, as a nameless guest, Michael saw what he'd never noticed before. The weary eyes of a waiter rearranging cutlery, not out of care, but out of muscle memory. A shallow nod, a fleeting, soulless smile that never quite reached the eyes. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" The hostess greeted him with a textbook perfect smile, but it lacked the warmth he once demanded in the early days of his brand. Michael smiled faintly, his eyes behind the glasses gleaming with cold, precise clarity. "John Johnson, table for 1. A false name, a ticket granting him quiet passage into a world he once ruled, now strangely unfamiliar. The young hostess led him to a table by the wide glass window where he could gaze out across the entire dining space and directly into the open kitchen where flames danced under the weight of heavy cast iron skillets. He sat silently, his fingertips brushing gently against the freshly pressed tablecloth, its edges already beginning to fray. A small detail, but to Michael, it was the first undeniable sign of neglect. From this vantage point, he could see everything, every glance, every gesture, every pause between the clinking of knives and forks. Michael opened the menu, his lips curving into an unreadable smile. The dishes were all still there, the same recipes he had once painstakingly crafted, each description still soaked in the signature style he had built. But a far more significant question hung in the air. Was the true soul of Carter's Steakhouse still here? And so, that night, as glasses of wine shimmered under the soft golden lights, Michael Carter, disguised as a stranger, began a journey not just to assess the quality of the food, but to rediscover something far more valuable, the core values that had once ignited an empire. A faint bell chimed from the kitchen door, its delicate ring merging with the low hum of jazz swirling through the air. From his hidden spot behind the decorative screen near the cashier counter, Michael's eyes sharpened. Just ahead of him, 2 young cashiers, Jessica, her red hair curling like the last flickers of a dying flame, and Melissa, with blonde waves that seemed constantly on the verge of a sigh, leaned close together, whispering as if no one could possibly hear them. But Michael heard every single word. "Did you see Chef Perfect's new special tonight?" Jessica sneered, her eyes glinting with mockery. "Bourbon this, truffle that, acting like we're some 5-star joint in Manhattan." Melissa giggled softly, her laughter edged with bitterness. "Travis was right, you know," she murmured. "That guy's trying to turn this place into something it's not. Our customers don't want all that fancy show. They want steak, not a bunch of flowery presentations." Michael's brow furrowed at the mention of Travis. How could he forget? Travis Sensei, the sous chef who left quietly after being denied a promotion. And now, Travis was the head chef at one of their fiercest competitors, Capitol Grill. As if a curtain had been abruptly pulled back, what Michael heard next made his blood run cold. How's the plan coming along? Jessica lowered her voice, but not low enough to escape the experienced ears of the man quietly watching from the shadows. Melissa cast a smug glance sideways. Perfect. Last week I swapped out his fancy Himalayan pink salt for regular table salt. You should have seen his face when he figured it out during his shift. And me, she let out a soft, devious laugh. I've been quietly delaying the kitchen tickets. Let's see if the customers still rave about the genius chef Ethan when their food takes forever to arrive. Jessica jiggled, leaning in closer. And the seafood delivery? Did you handle that? All done. I moved the delivery from morning to late afternoon. That night, Ethan was scrambling like mad to gather enough ingredients. I heard Robert even gave him a proper dressing down for being unprepared. Their hushed laughter echoed through the reception area like icy daggers. Michael clenched his phone tightly in his hand. After so many years navigating the corporate battlefield, he knew better than anyone a silent rebellion could wreak more havoc than any storm ever could. But what chilled him even more was the complicity of Robert, the manager he had once trusted implicitly. Michael slowly stepped back into the shadows, his eyes glinting cold and sharp like forged steel. This wasn't about an imperfect steak anymore, or a lack of courteous smiles. This was betrayal, a deliberate, organized act of sabotage. And Ethan, the young chef with talent blazing as bright as a blue flame, was being pushed into a war he hadn't even realized he was fighting. Michael took a deep breath, his fingers moving swiftly over his phone, jotting down every name, every action he had just overheard. He knew clearly, from this moment on, he was no longer just an anonymous guest. He had stepped into a battlefield, a battle to uncover the truth and protect the values that were slowly dying in the very house he had built with his own hands. The neon lights of John's Steakhouse glimmered through the thin curtain of rain that painted the night. Michael sat silently in his car, his fingers gently tapping the steering wheel, waiting for the precise moment when the restaurant's late-night shift began, the time when facades grew thin and truth had a habit of slipping through the smallest cracks. For nearly 2 weeks, he had appeared at his own restaurant under various disguises. Sometimes, he was just a lost customer wandering in during a slow afternoon. Other times, he was the last patron to leave at closing hour, his old coat soaked with rain as drenched as his heavy heart at those moments. And no matter the time, Michael always saw one man standing firm amidst the whirlwind of cold glances and hushed, mocking whispers. Ethan, that young head chef, his forehead always beaded with sweat under the kitchen flames, his eyes locked in unwavering focus, oblivious to fatigue. Though isolated, though every order was deliberately delayed, every ingredient secretly switched, he persevered, refining every flavor, adjusting every slice of steak as if each dish was a declaration to the world. I deserve to stand here. Michael had seen that look before somewhere, deep in his own past. A gaze that refused to bow, even when the whole world turned its back. And then, that fateful night came. The rain poured down like a monsoon. Michael sat hunched over the glowing screen of his laptop in his corporate office, overwhelmed by a feeling he couldn't quite name. The personnel file of Chef Ethan Walker glowed on the screen. And just as the cursor hovered over his personal details, Michael froze. Ethan Walker. Walker. It wasn't just some unfamiliar name. It was his mother's maiden, named the name of the woman who had taught Michael and his younger brother how to make their very first meat pie in a smoke-filled, humble kitchen from their childhood. Michael's hands trembled involuntarily as he opened the attached files. On the screen, a small ID photo appeared. That look, that unmistakable fire in his eyes, though the years had carved sharper lines across his face, that expression could never be mistaken. Ethan Walker was Ethan Carter, his own younger brother. A floodgate of memories collapsed, dragging Michael back to the turbulent days of a family torn apart by unnamed resentments. The final argument, the bitter refusal when Michael had reached out, offering Ethan a job at his first restaurant. I don't need your pity, Michael. I'll never live under your shadow. And then, 7 years of utter silence, as if they'd never even existed in each other's lives. Michael slowly closed his eyes. In his mind, his late father's voice echoed softly. A man can choose many roads to walk, but there's only one place to truly return to. Ethan, the boy who once stood beside him flipping steaks on their old, battered grill, had finally found his way back. But not as Michael's younger brother. He had returned with a burning ambition to reach the summit on his own terms, no matter how thorny that path might be. Michael clenched his fists, his eyes reddening. In that moment, he realized this wasn't just about salvaging a brand or cleaning up a company's internal mess. It was unfinished business between two brothers, a story about pride, about growing up, and about the chance to reclaim something they both thought was lost forever. "You chose not to live under my shadow, Ethan," Michael whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "And now, you're shining by the strength of your own flame." And perhaps it was time for Michael to do the right thing. Not as a CEO, but as a brother. Just as the flood of memories crashed over him, something clicked in his mind. In Ethan's personnel file, there was a small note he had overlooked earlier. Fixed annual leave, the 17th of July. Michael froze. That wasn't just any date. It was their father's birthday. The man both brothers had idolized. The man who had taught them to love the kitchen, the smell of wood smoke, and the warmth of meals made from the heart. Despite all the silence, despite taking their mother's surname to erase any connection to the name Carter, every year, Ethan still took that day off. A silent day of remembrance. No grand gestures. No need for anyone to know. Michael's fists tightened, his knuckles turning pale. And for a fleeting moment, he felt as small and lost as he had that rainy day, standing helplessly in the downpour, watching Ethan walk out of his life 7 years ago. His eyes drifted to the old photograph hanging in his office, the last day they had all laughed together, their father in the middle, one arm draped over Michael's shoulder, the other around a much younger Ethan. That same Ethan, eyes bright with unshaken dreams. Michael's eyes suddenly gleamed with a sharp intensity. "Ethan didn't choose to come back as my right hand," he muttered under his breath. He came back quietly, standing shoulder to shoulder, equal to the very shadow he once refused to live under. Suddenly, a thought flashed through Michael's mind. He immediately pulled up the restaurant's surveillance system, rewinding through the footage from the past month, something he should have done long ago. The screen lit up, and the recordings began to scroll slowly. And then, the truth revealed itself, clearer than any formal accusation could have ever been. Jessica was quietly removing kitchen order tickets for dishes prepared by Ethan, slipping them to the bottom of the pile to delay service. Melissa casually swapped out spice jars on the shelf, the expensive pink Himalayan salt replaced with cheap table salt, just enough to ruin the delicate balance of flavors. And then, the most damning scene, Robert, the manager Michael had once trusted implicitly, sneaking into a private office, shaking hands with Travis. For a brief second, a thick envelope exchanged hands. Their eyes gleamed with a shared, victorious smugness. It was all there, crystal clear, brutal in its honesty. Michael took a heavy breath and collapsed into his chair. But then, his eyes hardened with more resolve than ever before. If Ethan endured 7 years of hardship just to stand tall against the very legacy I built, then this older brother will not let him fight alone any longer. Michael reached for the internal phone system. His voice was low and hoarse, but every word landed with undeniable weight. "Get me the full employee records, all purchase orders, the last 3 months of delivery schedules, and call security. I'll be at the restaurant first thing tomorrow morning. There's no more room for shadows to hide." He set down the receiver, threw on his coat, and stepped out onto the balcony. Outside, the rain still poured. But this time, amid the patter of raindrops, Michael heard another sound, faint but unmistakable, the sound of an impending final battle. A battle where justice, honor, and family would all be weighed on the same scale. Tomorrow, the truth would come to light, and Michael Carter would not back down. That afternoon, the air at John's Steakhouse was as heavy as the storm looming outside. At 4:30 p.m., the restaurant hadn't even opened yet, but the hurried footsteps, anxious glances, and murmurs buzzing through the grand hall were enough to stir every corner of the space. Michael Carterno, longer the humble man in a faded ball cap, but the commanding founder stepped through the main entrance, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, the iconic John's Steakhouse pin gleaming proudly on his lapel. He didn't have to say a word. His presence at that exact moment was its own declaration. Robert, the restaurant's manager, pale as a ghost, rushed out from his office, a disorganized stack of papers trembling in his hands. "Sir, I didn't know you were coming today." Michael raised his hand gently, a simple gesture, yet it was enough to silence any excuse before it could even form. "I'd like all staff to gather in the main dining hall. We have an important conversation before opening hours." 5 minutes later, the restaurant's grand halance, filled with lively chatter from distinguished guests, now turned into a stage for a never-before-seen audit of integrity. Michael stood tall beside an open laptop, his eyes sweeping across every familiar and unfamiliar face, some filled with worry, others with hesitation, and a few even carrying a hint of defiance. At the far corner stood Ethan, silent. His pristine white chef's uniform stood out proudly amidst the sea of anxious bodies, a bold statement in itself. When their eyes finally met, the room seemed to fall away. No words, just a heavy silence deep and sharp as a blade slicing through old memories. Michael began to speak. His voice was low, not loud, but each word struck like a hammer falling against a cold, unyielding table. I am Michael Carter, and for the past month, I have been the most frequent customer of this very restaurant, but not as its owner. A wave of hushed whispers rippled through the room, then faded as quickly as it had come. But as a man searching for the soul of the creation he dedicated his entire life to, Michael turned the laptop screen toward the crowd. And this is what I found. With a single keystroke, the large screen on the wall lit up. The videos played, each cut sharp, every motion undeniable. Jessica discreetly pulling kitchen tickets out of the order queue. Melissa coldly switching out the spice jars. Trays of food left intentionally to cool under the heat lamps. And finally, the damning footage Robert shaking hands with Travis in the private office. A thick envelope changing hands. The entire room fell silent. Michael turned back, his eyes locking directly onto Robert's. Explain yourself, Robert, or shall I continue playing clips you probably don't even remember the cameras recorded? Robert trembled, his face pale as paper, his lips barely forming a hollow, lifeless sentence. I just, for the benefit, number, Michael cut him off, his voice booming through the room like a judge's gavel. This isn't about benefit, this is betrayal. Betrayal of kindness, betrayal of those who have worked tirelessly to keep the fire alive in this kitchen. He turned his gaze directly to Jessica and Melissa, his voice dropping low, cold enough to send a chill through every heart. As of this moment, Robert, Jessica, Melissa, you are no longer part of John's Steakhouse. Security will escort you out immediately, and if necessary, we'll see each other again in court. The doors behind him opened. 2 security staff members entered, their faces expressionless. The people who once thought they had the power to manipulate everything could now only lower their heads and step back into the very darkness they had created for themselves. The air was thick, frozen in silence. Slowly, Michael turned toward Ethan, the one person who hadn't spoken a word throughout the entire meeting, yet whose eyes had told a story far longer than any defense could offer. Their eyes met this time, no suspicion, no guarded glances, only defenses slowly crumbling. Chef Ethan, Michael paused, his voice softening, each word heavy with the weight of 7 years of separation. Or rather, Ethan Carter. The room fell utterly silent. A flicker of surprise crossed Ethan's face before he quickly regained his composure, but his hands clenched ever so slightly. Michael took slow, deliberate steps toward his brother, standing face to face just as they once did years ago. Only now, there was no grill between them, just a long, silent chasm of time. It took me 7 years to understand. Not everyone who walks away does so to turn their back on you. Some leave simply to prove they can stand tall on their own. The heavy silence deepened. And then, as if releasing every burden he'd carried, Michael spoke again, his voice rough but sincere. If you're ready to return, not in my shadow, but as yourself, with the talent and courage you've proven, you have, then don't just be Chef Ethan. Let the name Ethan Carter be carved on that kitchen door rightfully, as you've earned it. No one said a word, but perhaps it was the silence itself that rang the loudest. Ethan nodded gently. In his eyes, a tear hung at the brink, refusing to fall. And then just the faintest of smiles. Small, subtle, but enough to brighten every corner of the room once more. In that moment, Michael Carter knew it wasn't just a kitchen that had been saved. A family had finally found its way home. The moment that offer was spoken, the room fell into silence. Ethan stood still, his dark eyes like a deep, quiet lake, holding far more than words could ever express. He drew a long, steady breath, his gaze sweeping across the room where those who once ostracized, belittled, and even deliberately sabotaged his efforts could now only lower their heads, unable to meet the eyes of the man they had tried so hard to bring down. Ethan's voice rose low but firm, soft yet echoing throughout the hall. I don't need anyone's pity, Michael, and I'm not here to find my place by relying on the Carter name. Michael's brow tightened, but before he could speak, Ethan took a single step forward. His eyes shone with a resilient light Michael hadn't seen since that fateful day years ago. But if this name, Ethan placed his hand over his heart, where his pulse beat strong and proud, is to be carved above that kitchen door as a testament to everything I've endured, everything I've built with these very hands, then I will accept it. Not because I need it, but because I have earned it. Oh. Michael looked at his younger brother, and in those eyes, he saw again the image of a boy standing in the backyard, gripping a rusted grilling tong, the flickering flames of a small fire reflecting dreams too big for that small space. Their eyes met once more, But this time, it was no longer the clash of pride. It was a silent understanding, profound, complete. Outside the glass windows, the afternoon rain had long ceased, leaving golden streaks of sunset piercing through the lingering gray clouds. Michael turned his head slightly, his voice low but unwavering. Tomorrow, the name Ethan Carter will appear on the head chef's plaque. And if anyone has doubts, let the numbers, the meals served with heart, and the smiles of our customers speak for you. Ethan squinted slightly, his lips curling into a genuine smile for the first time in years. A smile that was light, unburdened, as if all the silent weights he had carried had finally been set down. Michael relaxed his shoulders and stepped forward, arms open wide. We spent 7 years standing only a few steps apart, Ethan. Let's not let that distance remain even one more minute. Without a word, Ethan stepped forward. In that embrace between two men, after 7 years of distance, misunderstandings, pride, and wounds shield everything in a brief but eternal moment. All the staff stood still, as if they had just witnessed something more miraculous than any management lesson or business philosophy ever taught. And in that moment, from the kitchen behind them, the clanging of knives and cutting boards, the sizzling of hot pans began again. A new night was about to start, not just another dinner service, but the first night of an entirely new era where John's Steakhouse would not only recover, but be reborn from its deepest cracks. Michael glanced at his watch, the corner of his lips lifting slightly. We've still got a shift ahead of us to prove we're worthy of everything we almost lost. Ethan, are you ready for tonight? Ethan adjusted the collar of his head chef's jacket, his eyes shining. I've been waiting for this day for a long time, Michael. I'm ready. And just like that, the two Menants, two lost halves on their separate journeys, stepped toward the kitchen together, where the flames were ready to burn once more. This time, not to consume the past, but to illuminate the true values that lay ahead. 6 months later, autumn gently laid a golden carpet of fallen leaves over the street outside, softening the facade of John's Steakhouse with the gentle touch of time. But inside those large glass doors, everything had completely changed. Michael stood quietly in the corner, watching. His eyes no longer carried doubt or concern, only a warm emotion, like a seasoned craftsman admiring a masterpiece completed by the next generation's hands. Above the kitchen door, a new brass nameplate gleamed under the soft light. Ethan Carter, Executive Chef. His brother's name now stood boldly, no longer hidden behind the shadow of another surname, but shining brightly with pride, each deeply by hard work, sweat, and countless sleepless nights in the kitchen. Under Ethan's leadership, John's Steakhouse didn't just recover. It roared back to life like a fire rekindled with the rarest, most precious kind of fuel, passion and integrity. Major culinary publications headlined, "A Remarkable Revival. Carter's Steakhouse, where culinary art touches the heart." Reservations skyrocketed. Customers flocked not only to savor masterfully reinvented classics, but also to experience an atmosphere long thought lost to Memoria Restaurant, where every smile, every glance from the staff was genuine, and where the value of humanity stood above every profit margin. That evening, as the night fell gently like a soft velvet curtain, Michael and Ethan stood together in the grand hall. The revolving glass door slowly turned open. An elderly woman with silver hair, wrapped in a thick but neatly brushed woolen sweater, stepped inside. Her hands trembled lightly, but her smile shone as brightly as a small flame on a winter's night. Michael stepped forward, gently took her fragile hand, and his voice trembled. "Welcome home, Mom." Ethan stood by his side, nodding softly. And for the first time in 7 years, the three of them walked together through that door that from now on wouldn't just welcome guests, but would also open to the return of the most sacred things, family. Guests in the restaurant looked up at the scene. Some quietly set down their silverware, others smiled gently. They understood there are moments that don't need to be spoken aloud, yet weigh more heavily than any grand speech. Michael wrapped his arm around his mother's shoulder. His gaze caught the restaurant sign reflected in the golden light outside the glass. John's Steakhouse, where family recipes create timeless memories. He gently squeezed Ethan's shoulder and whispered, "See, brother, in the end, what we've been cooking every day, it was never just about the meals." Ethan turned, his smile ripened by years of hardship and pride. It's about memories warm enough to last a lifetime. From the kitchen behind them, the rhythmic sounds of pans and knives resumed. The scent of perfectly cooked steak mingled with a faint aroma of herbs, drifting throughout the room. Somewhere in the restaurant, a soft jazz melody began to play. It wasn't a farewell tune boot, a new beginning, a prologue to a fresh chapter of a story that should have continued long ago. And in that moment, right there where they had once lost and found each other again, Michael Carter finally understood. The greatest legacy he could ever leave behind wasn't a grand restaurant empire, but a complete family bound together by love and by meals rich with the flavor of humanity. The sound of Michael's leather shoes echoed steadily across the polished wooden floor as he and Ethan slowly guided their mother past each table. The entire space seemed to hold its breath. Every eye followed the three generations, wrapped in a scene so warm, so simple, and yet more sacred than words could ever express. A little boy sitting at a table near the aisle still held his half-finished forkful, his big round eyes following them closely. When Michael bowed gently to greet familiar guests, the boy turned and whispered to his father, "Dad, are they a real family? It looks just like in the movies." The father simply smiled, his eyes quietly following the scene. Michael guided his mother past the open kitchen, where the chefs now worked in a harmony never seen before. The kitchen that was once a battlefield of schemes now glowed with the cheerful clatter of utensils, the warm flicker of flames, and the genuine smiles of the new team people whom Ethan had inspired with pride for their craft, not only through the precision of their knife skills, but also in how they kept the fire of passion burning steadily through life. His mother, Mrs. Eleanor, slowly stopped. Her eyes glistened with tears as her fragile hand reached out, gently touching the family photo hanging on the wall near the Kachina photo now framed anew, shining in a brilliant golden hue. Michael, Ethan as young boys, and their father, Mr. Frank Carter, beaming with a wide smile, still holding that old rusted grilling tong. "Your father? He must be smiling now." Her voice was hoarse, but each word dripped into the quiet space like honey. Standing behind her, Ethan silently pulled from his pocket an old handkerchief, its edges frayed. He gently handed it to his mother. That very handkerchief was the one their father used every time he stood by the grill. The faint scent of smoke from those old days seemed to linger still in its threads. Michael swallowed hard, his hand tightening around his mother's frail shoulder. "Mother, from today, I promise." He turned to Ethan, their eyes meeting with no distance left between them, "that there will always be a place here for family, not just for blood relatives, but for anyone who's ever wandered away and longs to find their way home." Mrs. Eleanor smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the deep relief of witnessing years of family fractures finally healed. As they continued toward the large table set in the center of the dining hall, the ceiling lights reflected off the polished silverware. The soft clinking of wine glasses echoed like a small yet proud triumphal hymn. Ethan pulled out a chair for their mother at the center seat, the place reserved for the guest of honor that night. The new staff, now fully embracing the spirit of family is the core value that Michael and Ethan had instilled, quietly brought out the finest dishes. And the main course for that night's banquet, grandfather's bourbon-glazed ribeye, the legendary steak reinvented from their father's old recipe, now elevated to perfection by Ethan's own hands. Eleanor looked at the exquisitely presented dish, smiled gently, and whispered, "It tastes just like the old days, but there's something special. This is truly your doing." Michael turned to Ethan. In that moment, words became unnecessary. Only the glimmer of pride in the elder brother's eyes and the quiet, profound smile from the younger brother, who had once carried so much pride and loneliness, remained. And when their wine glasses gently touched under the warm golden lights, Michael spoke softly, a declaration not just for that evening, but for the road ahead. "We once lost each other, but today, right here, we found a whole family again." Outside the glass windows, the stars had already climbed high. For the first time in years, the sky above the hill, where the flagship restaurant stood, glowed brightly with countless stars, if the entire universe had gathered to witness a perfect reunion after so many storms. And in that moment, Michael Carter knew this one undeniable truth. The greatest legacy he had ever built was not the chain of renowned restaurants, but a space where lost hearts could always find their way back, a true home. A business may begin with numbers, be signed into existence with thick contracts, and rise under the dazzling lights of success. But to endure through the roughest storms, what holds it together isn't flawless financial reports, but the people who stay when the storms hit. It's loyalty that isn't washed away by temptation. It's talent that's valued, even when those hands still carry the scent of smoke or are calloused from years of hard work. And above all, it's the relationships that are never forgotten, no matter the distance, no matter the times they turned away, there always remains a path home. Because ultimately, the true prosperity of a business isn't measured by profits, but by the values it leaves behind in people's hearts. That value is a place where, no matter how far we roam, we still want to come home.